the drivers have awesome flexibility. Summer vacation, fall break, Christmas break, they have that time off.
And not being 65, I don't have Medicare, so the school district offers a great benefit package, so that was important to me. Very flexible hours. I've always been an early riser, so I'm up at 4:30 or 5 o'clock in the morning, so I can come in and do a morning run, still get home in time to have breakfast with my wife, and then afternoon around 1 or 1:30, come back to the yard and jump on the bus and do an afternoon run, and still be home for dinner. It's really a very flexible schedule. So if you come on board, there's a signing bonus that they pay out after completion of your training in your first 6 months and then your 1-year anniversary. There are retention bonuses now for drivers to stick around and come back.
The bus driver is transporting someone's kids, a group of kids that are not their own, but we all know how valuable our children are. And so it's a very important job. It's a huge, massive amount of responsibility and extremely rewarding at the same time. And so for me personally, my goal is that in the morning, I smile, hey, how you doing? Have a good day. When they get off the bus in the morning, have a good day, learn something new.
One day, this probably a 4th grader got on and handed me a card. And I opened the card and it said, Grandma and I just want you to know how much we appreciate you getting me to school safely. And it's like, what else is there? You know, that's the best card I got all year.
We all play an essential role in each child's day at school, whether it's learning or being fed and getting the nutrition they need so that their little minds and bodies will work to their full capacity. And I just love the children. I do this because I love to interact with them.
I'm grandma status, you know what I mean? So I'm not their mother, I'm not a teacher. You know, I'm here to feed you like a grandmother does, make sure you eat healthy, and you're on your way. I make sure I try to know most of them's name. With the mask, it's been a little hard over the past few years. But I try to know their names, and I try to talk to them. We joke, we laugh, and you know, when things come up, they come and talk to me and tell me what's new in their life. So it's good.
I love it. I love working mornings, especially you get to see the kids in the morning eating breakfast and just watching them play and seeing their happy little faces running around. I love what I do. I get to interact with teachers as well as all the students walking around, and it's always nice hearing, "Good morning, Ms. Zareda."
This school culture here is amazing. It's one of inclusion, it's one of pride and support and teamwork. And being a part of that gives me ownership. It helps me to feel like I'm part of something special, which we are. These children deserve the best, and so we work our hardest to meet their needs and provide them with a happy, safe environment.
To me, I feel like we're family. We are very close. We're a big team here. We're all here for each other. We're all a very big support group for each other. That's what I really love about being here.
As the largest employer in Northern Nevada, Washoe County School District is truly the heart of our amazing community. With more than 62,000 students in their care, WCSD's staff is made up of passionate and caring individuals who have a daily impact on the lives of Washoe County's most precious citizens, our children. WCSD is an employer who is committed to building a diverse and innovative workforce, and we value the background and experiences that all of our employees bring to our schools and students. As a full-time employee with WCSD, you can expect to receive a benefits package that includes one of the best medical plans in Northern Nevada, along with enrollment in and contributions to Nevada's public employee retirement system. If flexibility is what you need in your career choice, WCSD offers support positions that can fit almost any schedule. And with schools located across Washoe County, there is a great chance you can find the perfect job right in your neighborhood. But perhaps one of the most important benefits of working at WCSD is the ability you will have to transform the education experience of our students. Passionate, caring, and committed to providing Washoe County's children with the best education experience possible. If these words describe you, please apply with WCSD and join the heart of Washoe County.
Working with the families and the communities has been some of the greatest aspects of the job, making sure that I'm involved in school as a professional, but also within my community as a proud person who just lives here in the Reno Sparks area.
My job as principal is to help make sure that I'm setting my teachers up to be able to plan for and execute lessons that make every minute count, that they're excited about, their students are excited about, and they ultimately feel tremendous success as a result of all that hard work.
One thing that kind of drives what I do every day is to take care of people. We want to be here to support people. We want to celebrate the positives. We want to find the good.
One thing I love to do every year is learn as many names as I can. COVID has made that really hard, especially with masks. But that's one thing personally I pride myself on, is knowing the names of as many kids as possible.
My experience with Washoe County School District has been really positive for my personal and professional growth. It's given me opportunities to be really innovative at the schools that I'm serving, working with the teachers, staffs, other administrators, learning from one another in a collaborative nature.
And I think that's really a trademark of the Washoe County School District, is we really view this as we're all in this together, especially coming through the other side of the pandemic. I think we've really grown together as a community to support one another. And I think anybody relocating to this area would really feel that.
Being a state employee, we are part of PERS, which I appreciate. As a family of educators, my wife and I both in the Washoe County School District, that is a benefit that we look forward to. The Washoe County School District does their best to get us what they can and offer us what they can to be competitive with other employers, whether it's inside education, outside education.
Sounds like you do a lot here to keep the students and staff motivated.
We try, and it's a team effort. It takes everybody in this school to do that. So all of our admin team, all of our teachers, our department leads, our custodians, making kids feel welcome here. I make it a goal to know staff all the way down to our night custodians, our nutrition workers, our aides in special ed, and so on. Morning, Bill.
If you're going to be in education, it's not a job, it's a lifestyle. It's a lifestyle that you choose to be here for the kids, for the community. It's not about punching in and clocking out. It's really a lifestyle that you choose.
I would say for future educators in Washoe County, teaching can bring a huge amount of joy. It can bring a huge amount of satisfaction to your life. I mean, it just fills me with such a positive energy. Every time I have the opportunity to interact with my students and their families, I just love that piece about it.
I believe in the Washoe County School District because I'm a product of the Washoe County School District. I was born and raised here. I have met great, inspiring people, teachers that have led me into this profession.
I really look forward to every day coming out here, and I didn't think I'd really make it this far in elementary, but here I am because of the people I work with and the amazing community around here, and it's just we're all in it together, working really hard.
My colleagues and I are family. So many things, we experience as educators when you're in a building, you can't help but we raise our babies together. We experience trauma, we experience the celebrations, and those are all the things that form that family.
There are tons of different types of positions depending on what it is that you want to accomplish in your career. And there's a copious amount of professional development that you can put yourself in and grow in any area that you desire.
If you want to make more money, go get more education. Go get your national board certification. I just did that a couple years ago, and that was the experience of a lifetime.
I try to encourage and enlighten my parents to be a part of the school, and I feel like I get a lot of positive feedback with my parents. There's no boundaries or wall, that we have an open communication.
When you hear a story or a student come back to you, or you hear a family member come back to you and thank you and have such gratitude for things that you've done and know that you did make a difference, that's worth $1 million.
I would say for future educators in Washoe County, teaching can bring a huge amount of joy. We're all here to do what's best for kids. We want to have a good time. We want kids to have a good time. We want them to be part of a learning community where they feel like they're connected and that it's really about them.
I began my teaching career in Texas. I taught outside the San Antonio area, and then I also taught in the greater DFW area, and then transitioned here. And it was a wonderful experience for me to transition to Washoe County. There are a lot of supports, there's lots of professional development available.
All these teachers that have shaped my early music life have really been just really amazing, inspiring educators in Washoe County School District. And I just wanted to be a piece of that.
There are so many different things you get to be a part of being the librarian. I'm sometimes called the heart of the school, and I hope that that is something I portray. And if you're interested in working with students daily, hands-on, being a librarian is a wonderful position in the schools.
If you love children, there are just so many opportunities for growth here. There are tons of different types of positions depending on what it is that you want to accomplish in your career. And there's a copious amount of professional development.
Any position within the school district there's growth for, whether it's in that department or others. Once you're inside the school district, passions change, your likes change, or you realize there's other interests you may have that you didn't know exist before. There's a lot of resources internally that would definitely help.
Remember, your goal is to educate and make an impact on the little humans that you're teaching. And that's the most important piece, is meeting their needs and doing it in the best way possible.
I have worked with the best administrators. I have been so lucky in all 14 years of my teaching. I have had some of the greatest administrators. So I feel like I definitely am supported. I feel like they have my back.
All the people at the district who did my training, they were so supportive. When they heard my story, they just wanted to help me. They reach out continuously and ask for my opinion. They asked me to be on certain committees because I have a unique perspective as a parent of someone who is in special needs, but also as someone who works here in the district as a volunteer and works in special education.
My experience with Washoe County School District has been really positive for my personal and professional growth. It's given me opportunities to be really innovative at the schools that I'm serving, working with the teachers, staffs, other administrators, learning from one another in a collaborative nature, reviewing data to really serve the communities that we serve.
All right, good evening, everyone. I'd like to welcome everyone here to this evening's virtual budget forum. My name is Dr. Angie Taylor, and I am the president of the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees. And on behalf of my fellow trustees, some of which are here and others are not, the Washoe County School District staff and I, we thank you for joining us, both to learn about the 22-23 budget for the district and to provide your input, suggestions, and feedback. We've already received some questions, and we thank you for those. We truly do value everyone's voice and want to provide a convenient and an easy way for you to participate on tonight. So we have enjoyed much success with virtual forums in the past, and we look forward to this event on tonight. Tonight we are coming to you live from the administration room, from the boardroom, and this is also being live streamed to our YouTube channel. This recording will also be archived on our website for viewing by anyone at any time if they're unable to join us live here on tonight. Most of our trustees, as I mentioned, are watching at home this evening along with you. As all of us trustees understand that the importance of the district's budget and receiving your input on this budget. So let's begin now by having our panels introduce themselves. I'm going to start with my colleagues to my right, Clerk Ellen Nettle. Please start us off, and we can just go around the table to the Vice President, the Superintendent, and so on.
All right, I'm Ellen Minetto. I am the clerk of Washoe County School District.
Good evening, Dr. Diane Nicolette. I am your board vice president.
Good evening, staff. Our WCSD family, Superintendent Kristen McNeil.
And I'm Mark Mathers, Chief Financial Officer.
I'm Jeff Bozzo, the district's budget director.
And I'm Colleen DeLong with the Office of Communications and Community Engagement.
All right, so after our presentation tonight, we're going to begin with a presentation from our CFO and our budget director, Mr. Mather and Mr. Bozzo, and then we'll open up the forum to our question and answer period. Again, as I said, we've already received some questions, and we thank you for those. If you're interested in how can you submit a question and provide some input, I'm going to turn it over to Clerk Minetto, and she will talk about that process.
Thank you, Madam President. If you're interested, we are very interested in hearing from you, our stakeholders. To submit your questions, please send an email to questions@washoeschools.net. Now, this email address is displayed at the bottom of the screen, and my understanding is it will be there this whole forum. We have already received questions from the community, and we'll be trying to answer as many questions as we can. But we plan to conclude this virtual forum at about 6:30 and may not get to all the questions. If we cannot get to your question tonight, staff will email you back an answer within about a week. We will also group like questions together and not answer them individually, as we have seen some trends in the questions submitted in advance. And now I will turn it over to our Superintendent, Dr. McNeil.
Thank you very much, Clerk Minetto. First of all, I would like to thank everyone for participation in the virtual budget forum. As we all know, our budget is one of the most important issues that we have going on within our school district. Our budget impacts our students, our staff, our families, and all of our community members as well. So hearing your questions is vitally important to this process. In addition to Chief Financial Officer Mark Mathers and our Budget Director Jeff Bozzo, we also have our district leadership team in the audience. And as we get questions, we will have our leadership team members come up and hopefully be able to help out answer some of these questions. But also, they have worked very, very hard in order to make sure that our budget is sound, along with our Chief Financial Officer and our Budget Director, to get us to where we need to be. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to President Taylor.
Thank you, Superintendent McNeil. Again, we want to encourage you, if you have questions, even comments you want to submit them, please do. Questions@washoeschools.net. This is a really important budgeting process. The budget is critical, as was said by our superintendent, and we really want to encourage you to participate because we need to hear from you. So that being said, we're going to turn it over to our financial gurus. We're going to start with our Chief Financial Officer, Mr. Mather.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. We do have a PowerPoint presentation we'd like to go through. We realize this is pretty dense material and it can get pretty technical, but we think it's important for our audience to have the context for how the district is funded and the constraints and parameters we operate under when we prepare our budget. So as you'll hear, we are not always in control of our own destiny, so to speak. So we want to cover that with you and then hopefully have enough time for all of your questions at the end. So real quickly, I'm going to go through sections 1 through 3 of the presentation, and then Jeff Bozzo, our budget director, will cover the last 3 sections. So first, a couple quick facts about our budget and our funding. Since a lot of times people recall the past, and we want to catch you up to date on kind of where we've been. Unlike some of the, some people who still harken back to the days when we had a deficit, our Board of Trustees and staff have actually prepared and approved balanced budgets. And when we say a balanced budget, we mean ongoing revenues are enough to cover our ongoing costs. We've had balanced budgets now for 3 straight fiscal years, and we presented a balanced tentative budget to our board last month, so that would mean 4 straight balanced budgets of our general fund budget in a row. So we are in a place of stability and have a solid budget, but that came through a lot of painful decisions, a lot of difficult decisions in the past. And so as you can see from this slide, we had to reduce costs or shift costs out of our general fund totaling more than $60 million from fiscal year 17 through 19. So it's been tough, but we've kind of reversed things, steadied the ship, as you can see in that slide that shows our cash. We saw our cash decline greatly from around fiscal year 15 through 18, and now you can see it's rebounded because of those balanced budgets. That doesn't mean, however, we are in a tremendously great place in the sense of the resources we have to use. Candidly, fiscal support of K through 12 in Nevada has been rather anemic. When we compare ourselves to the cities and counties in our region, as you can see in that top right chart, our revenues have grown roughly half of what those other governmental agencies have seen. Our revenues on average grew only 3% during fiscal years 16 through 20, and it's only gotten worse since. And as those who've participated in these past virtual budget forums know, our per pupil funding historically has not even matched inflation. The one time it did was in fiscal year 20 when the governor funded a 3% COLA for all school district staff, and we were happy to pass that along in our budget to all staff. So in that year, we all received 3% COLAs. But barring that year, we've been under inflation, and that's certainly been the case in the last several years. And so that brings us to some of the funding comparisons that a lot of people engage in, and we wanted to cover this real quickly and show and confirm again how Nevada is doing in terms of funding on a per pupil basis K through 12 education. So we start with the National Education Association. They have an annual report called Rankings of the States. There is a lag in that reporting, but you can see in 2019-2020 we were ranked 45th in terms of per pupil revenues. They look at all revenues, so this isn't a game where only state revenues are used or local revenues are used. They look at all revenues. So we ranked 45th among the 50 states in terms of per pupil funding. We also in Nevada had a much greater student to per pupil or student to teacher ratio. In other words, our class sizes were significantly higher than the national average. And we were also below the median in terms of average salaries for teachers. So again, we hear a lot of people talk about maybe it's not that bad, but the statistics show otherwise. And then this next slide again just uses different sources. And again, we rank near the bottom in terms of per pupil funding in Nevada, which really, is difficult for us. It's a challenge for us, of course. We can only spend what we receive at the state, and we'll talk about how we're funded in a second. But when we receive, funding to the tune of being 45th to 50th in this nation in terms of per pupil funding, that makes it very challenging to provide adequate class sizes, and adequate compensation for our employees. And we're well aware of that, and we'll talk about that more in this presentation. But in terms of good news, Education Weekly recently came out with their annual report called Quality Counts, and it was interesting to see Nevada as a state ranked 18th in the nation for K through 12 academic achievement. So again, you'll hear a lot of information that says we're last in the state in terms of academic performance, and at least from this report shows otherwise. And for me, it shows quite a return on investment. If we receive, a D- in terms of the ranking for finance, and we're last among the states according to this publication, it's quite an achievement to be 18th in terms of academic performance. That's a great return on investment in my book. Just imagine if we were funded near the median of states, what our academic achievement would look like. So I think it's important to kind of note that. So now I'm going to turn to how we're funded in Nevada. This is really important, and I'll try to go through this quickly. So most of you know we in Nevada had a funding model called the Nevada Plan for many years. It worked for a while, but it became apparent recently that it was anything but transparent. It's kind of archaic, and so the legislature in 2019 adopted a new funding plan called the Pupil-Centered Funding Plan, and this is very similar to other states where the notion is funding follows the students, and that students in a district should have roughly the same educational opportunity across all the schools in the district. So, a student in the eastern part of the district is going to receive the same as in the western part, and so forth. Pretty basic fundamental concept, but it kind of tries to fund our schools in that manner. What it also did was take all of the school dedicated revenues in the state, and that includes a significant portion of the sales tax we all pay when we buy a washing machine or whatever, any kind of good. It includes the operating rate of our property tax that you pay on your property tax bill. It includes our portion of motor vehicle registration fees. It takes all of those revenues that kind of sometimes went to school districts and sometimes went to the state before, and pools all of them together at the state level. So now the state receives all of that funding and then pools it together and then distributes it down to each school district. So again, none of the revenue, except for only $7 million in our general fund, goes straight to the state and then gets distributed back to us. We don't control what we can generate. We can't raise fees, unlike cities and counties. We can't raise new taxes, even though we might think we need more funding. We can't do that. It all set by the state, and it all goes to the state. And so how that works is, first on the left side of the screen here, there's base funding, and that funding is intended to go to educate every child in the state. So every child in the state should receive, after the adjustments you see there in the black box, roughly the same amount on it in terms of kind of an equity-based calculation. And then on the right, there are special groups of students. There are obviously special education students that have unique needs. But then in addition to that, you see the three weighted funding categories of English learners, gifted and talented students, and at risk. And so the model the state now employs is those students in those weighted categories with special needs receive an additional amount to fund the extra services that they should get. The state's nowhere close to fully funding those extra supports for special education, English learners, gifted and talented, or at risk, but that's the concept, and they have a target amount they will shoot for, and hopefully someday we get there. In the bottom left, you can see the results of the equity adjustments, and we'll talk about those more specifically in the next two slides, but you can see how that breaks down. You can see the per pupil amount for Eureka County, which is extraordinary, really. It's $33,701 per child. Story and Esmeralda being next highest. And then you see the lowest funded school districts in the state. And yes, Washoe County School District has the lowest amount of per pupil funding. We receive the lowest amount per student of any of the 17 school districts. So why is that? Well, again, the first equity adjustment that comes into play when making these adjustments is called the small district and small school adjustment. And this is, the intention here is to account for school districts that are sparsely populated or have large geographic areas or just lack kind of the efficiencies and economies of scale that Clark and Washoe have. And so they have a smaller base to spread, for instance, administrative and busing and custodial costs. And so there's an adjustment to that per pupil amount, and you can see that we all start in the chart on the bottom right. We all start at the statewide average rate of $7,029 per pupil in fiscal year 22, our current fiscal year, and then you can see the amounts of the adjustments for that small district, small school factor. Washoe, as you can tell, does receive an adjustment for certain small schools. So there's a small district adjustment, and then there's a small school adjustment based on their attendance zone. And so you can see in that chart to the bottom right, we do receive $15 million for, again, kind of the lack of economies of scale we have for schools in the Gerlach area, the 3 schools in Incline Village, Verdi, Wadsworth, and a number of other areas. In total, those adjustments, though, are $116 million. So we got about $15 million of the $116 million there. And then the second major adjustment in the pupil-centered funding plan, and again, I know this is very technical, but it's important, is what's called the comparable wage index adjustment, or what's called the Nevada Cost of Education Index. And what this is trying to adjust districts for is how much professions that we have to compete against are paid in those counties. So when a person is going through college, say they get an accounting degree, they could become an accountant, but they could become a teacher too. And so we have to compete for that talent among those professions in our region. Unfortunately, this calculation has some issues, we believe, and you can see the results of that equity adjustment. It is saying that we get no additional dollars as a result of the adjustment. So you can see in terms of that index number, we're at 1.0 versus Clark being at 1.03, Churchill and other rural counties being at 1.027. So you can see as a result of this calculation, Clark County School District receives $67 million more as a result of this adjustment, and we receive nothing. So again, we believe there are real serious issues with this calculation. We have lobbied the state a number of times to reconsider the calculation. We continue those efforts. But those two adjustments are how we end up, unfortunately, with the lowest per pupil amount in the state. And so again, most of our revenues now come directly from the state. This pie chart shows you that 98.6% of our general fund revenues come from the state. Again, base funding and then those weighted categories of funding. Our local revenues amount to only $7 million. Those are investment earnings on our cash, some reimbursements of our costs, sale of property and equipment, and other sundry revenues. So again, we don't have the ability to raise revenues here. We can't impose a new tax for operating purposes. We can't raise fees, unlike cities and counties. We get what we get, and you know, this kind of shows you that. So that's the background to what we have to work with when we prepare our budget. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to our budget director to kind of go through and look under the hood, if you will, about and tell us how we actually build that general fund budget.
Thank you, Mark. Once again, my name is Jeff Falzo, the district's budget director. So starting off with how we build our general fund budget, the first part is, well, what is a budget? So that's our financial plan for the fiscal year for the entire district, and that sets the maximum amount of money we can spend for that fiscal year. We have a lot of state laws and regulations around the budgeting process in Nevada, so it's very structured from the timeline to how your revenues and expenditures work. And then once that budget's approved for the fiscal year, that budget is locked in for the fiscal year, and it's hard to increase your expenditures, your budgeted expenditures throughout the rest of the year. unless we have a budget augmentation, but that can only be a result of additional revenues or additional fund balance. And again, the budget is our district's policy in terms of dollars. So where do we want to spend our money, and where are we going to spend our money? So each year when we review the budget, we're not just incrementing it forward, we're adjusting our priorities as our priorities adjust. So next, how we build our general fund budget. We start off with estimating expenditures. So that's what we call our base budget. That's a snapshot of all of our positions and our non-personnel expenses. We also adjust those for step increases, any negotiated adjustments from negotiations that have concluded, inflationary adjustments, contract changes, anything else that we know that happens. Another item that we adjust for are school allocations based on projected enrollment for the next year. But that's how we get our total expenditure estimate. We then move on to revenues, and that's all based on the state budget. As the previous slide that Mark showed, our general fund budget is 98.5 or 98.6% funded by the state. So the state budget tells us what our budget's going to be. We also have a small portion of local revenues that we estimate. Those are investment earnings, indirect cost revenues, and some other small items. So we compare those two against each other, and we come out with either an estimated budget deficit or an estimated budget surplus. In most years, we've had an estimated budget deficit that we've had to resolve. And this note here was from a previous budget presentation, but our preliminary budget did have a small preliminary budget surplus. So again, once we see if we have a budget surplus or budget deficit, we have to go through and make different spending decisions. So as you can see in this top section here, we have a minimal amount of per pupil funding increase for FY23. It's 1.3% with flat enrollment for next year. So this gets us to our spending decisions. So we have cost increases like the step increases I mentioned earlier, any cost of living adjustments that have already been negotiated, and other inflationary pressures. We also have cost decreases when we evaluate the budget, so vacancy savings, which we've seen quite a bit of the last couple of years, and then turnover savings. So that's when a more experienced employee retires and is replaced by a lesser experienced employee. And based on how our salary schedules work, that less experienced employee makes less. Therefore, there's a savings when that position's turned over. And lastly, on this part, having a structurally balanced budget, as Mark mentioned, we have 4 of those in a row now, is incredibly important. It creates stability for the district from a fiscal perspective. So with our state funding, we use that per pupil amount to figure out what's our spending going to be for the year, and that allows us to determine what employee compensation can be, and other costs that we can take on in the budget process as well. And we also need to have a stable fund balance and cash reserves in case we have an unexpected economic downturn. The pandemic from a couple of years ago caused us to need to have some fund balance. And we also have cash flow needs like meeting our monthly payroll. So this next section here is how is our general fund shaping up for FY23. So we'll start with our general fund revenues. Mark showed this slide a few moments ago, but our revenues are $532 million in the general fund, flat enrollment with just a 1.3% per pupil funding increase. So our expenditure changes that we evaluate during the budgeting process, one of those are step increases. So those step increases and any negotiated changes resulted in about $12.6 million cost of the general fund. But that turnover savings I mentioned earlier was just over $6 million, and that was much higher, almost double than what we typically have in a normal year. So that helped us this year to achieve that preliminary budget surplus. We also had costs related to the rezoning due to the new Hug High School opening, and the O'Brien and Swope middle school expansions. We've added inflationary costs to the budget, so earlier this year we transferred funds from our contingency over to the transportation budget for fuel costs, so we built that into the FY23 budget, and if we continue to see inflationary pressures moving forward, then we'll utilize our district's contingency account in order to address those items. And again, those higher than usual vacancy and turnover savings really helped with our budget situation this year. So we have a lot of different ways during our budget presentations to show how we spend our dollars. So this one here shows it on a per pupil basis. So these first two sections are direct instruction, so all of our teachers, aides and assistants. This includes our regular instruction teachers, special ed and EL funded teachers, and then student support. So these are your counselors, psychologists, health services staff, and other academic staff. That represents about 77.7% of our per pupil amount. That's how much we're spending of that state per pupil amount. Another 13.7% is spent on operations and student transportation. And then the last bucket here is central services. This isn't just what happens here at the admin building. There's district-wide costs here. So that contingency account for unforeseen items that I mentioned earlier, district-wide IT expenses, and then we also have our property and liability insurance premium, which keeps increasing every year. That's paid out of a district-wide account. So again, this is our small preliminary budget surplus. It was $451,000 when we presented it back in February. Again, that was due to more indirect cost revenues than previous years because of these federal stimulus funds that we've been receiving, and then the higher than expected turnover savings that we saw. For the tentative budget back in March, we shifted this $451,000 surplus to the general fund contingency account in order to address future budget issues, such as direction from last Tuesday's board meeting related to compensation and other staffing issues. So we'll come back at a future board presentation later this month and next month to talk about analysis from that board direction on April 12th. So with our ongoing revenues and expenditures, we did have that $451,000 surplus, but we also have one-time savings and one-time costs. So there is a one-time Washoe Education Association COVID differential payment of about $6.3 million. So we did have some one-time savings to offset that, and that was because we're paying for some textbooks out of our stimulus funds next year. So our general fund textbook budget is going to realize a savings. So that pays for about half of that COVID differential, and then we'll be using about just over $3.1 million of our general fund balance to cover the rest of that one-time cost. So the current status for our general fund budget, again, almost the entirety of our general fund budget is funded by the state, almost 99%. We saw a minimal increase, 1.3%, in our per pupil funding for next fiscal year, and then we're limited by those revenues, and we can only spend what we're given by the state. So again, we'll come back future board meetings on the April 26th, and I believe it's May 24th, to talk about what board decisions have impacted the budget for the rest of the budget process. So I'm going to hand it back to Mark for a moment to talk about where do we go from here and talk about some short and long-term critical issues.
Thanks, Jeff. So we're almost in the home stretch. We're almost to your questions. But thank you, Jeff, for kind of summarizing where things stand. But we know that's not the end of the story, really. We know very well the impact inflation's had on our staff, and it certainly has an impact on our budget, and that's probably going to have an impact for some period of time. And that puts pressure on all of us, but certainly many our teachers and other staff, our lower paid staff, frankly, it's very difficult. This Tuesday we did have a presentation on our critical labor shortages, and we know that's a huge issue for the district and nationwide for that matter, but certainly here we know we're short of many bus driver positions, custodial positions, and in many areas. So leadership presented options and a plan to the Board of Trustees that approved that to try to address those issues, but that will incur costs. We know that. We'll need to fund those costs. We think we have a way to do that, at least initially, but this is going to be a continuing story for the district, and we'll be providing updates to our Board of Trustees. But we know it's a huge issue for all of us, and again, certainly for our employees. We also know, it's been great to have federal stimulus dollars to add staff in the classrooms, to fund a tutoring program, to fund a leadership pipeline program, to provide some succession planning for deans and assistant principals and so forth. So it's allowed us to do some really great things to try to address the learning loss we've seen and provide the kind of supports our students need, but that goes away in 2024. And so then what happens? And so we know that's also a huge issue that we need to account for in the future. We know we need to fund greater investment in areas to improve academic achievement. But again, that's going to depend on state funding. We can't wave a wand, we can't snap our fingers to make that funding materialize. And we know, again, our class sizes are well above national averages. That's the case in Washoe, that's the case in the state as a whole. And that's a huge impact on learning for our students. So those are all what I call, or what we call short, but also long-term issues that face the district where we will need to lobby the state for more funding. We know that. We have worked on that in the past, and we'll need to continue to work on that in the future.
So as part of the budgeting process, we don't look at just one fiscal year ahead of us. We look many fiscal years ahead of where we're at. And some of the issues that we're seeing and will develop into our 4-year financial plan we've been working on have revenue and expenditure impacts. So the first part here is we've seen enrollment declines. We have an enrollment decline over the next 4 years we'll be seeing starting in FY24 through FY27. We have an enrollment bubble. So one of our past budget presentations showed that we had, I think it was more than 600 kids in our high school grade levels compared to the rest of our grade levels. So as those students graduate, then they'll be replaced by lower levels of students. And that will just inherently create an enrollment decline, which will cause our per pupil funding to decline. We also have charter schools moving into the area, and as students leave to go to the charter schools, that also impacts our funding situation. And then when the stimulus funds go away, we do have indirect cost revenues from those stimulus funds, so we'll have a revenue decline there as well. And then on the expenditure side, we'll have inflation of energy and goods, wage inflation, any new strategic plan initiatives we might have with the new superintendent, and then the funding cliff that Mark alluded to a minute ago about the ending of ESSER 2 and 3 stimulus funds. And then during all that, we have our next legislative session that'll determine funding for the FY24 and 25 biennium. So finally, our FY23 budget timeline, the board approved a structurally balanced tentative budget back in March. We had the critical labor shortage discussion on April 12th, and then on April 26th, Mark and I will be presenting more budget analysis related to the FY23 budget. And then at our May 24th Board of Trustees meeting, we'll have a hearing on our tentative budget, and then hopefully the adoption of our final budget for FY23, because that'll need to be submitted by June 8th. So that wraps up our budget presentation and brings us to questions. So Colleen, I'll hand it off to you.
Thank you. Thanks to both of you for the great presentation. I noticed that several of the questions that we've received were actually covered in your presentation. So I think we'll try to hit the ones that weren't and then circle back to those ones as time permits, if that's okay with everyone. And we'll start with our first question that's been posed, and I'm actually going to invite our Chief Operating Officer to the podium because I believe this would be best addressed by him. And the question is, how are you going to fix the bus problem for the 22-23 school year? Is there an increase in funds allotted to transportation and bus drivers in the new budget?
Thank you. Pete Etchart, Chief Operating Officer for the district, and that's definitely a great question, especially coming right on the heels of our presentation to the Board of Trustees on this critical matter on Tuesday evening. So these are indeed difficult times when it comes to staffing, and as our Chief Financial Officer said, this is definitely a national issue, and I think everyone's trying to work their way through this, and we're no exception to that. The short answer is that we are doing everything we can do to try and pursue options and find solutions that will help get us through this matter, and we definitely do not desire to continue with the area rotation schedule for next year. We discussed with our trustees all of the options that we are looking at. These range from our intense efforts in recruitment and retention of our drivers, and also the more internal processes such as optimization studies to make sure we're as efficient as we can be with the resources that we have. But they also range all the way to looking at the more controversial items such as looking at walk zone changes and bell time changes. But bottom line is, I can guarantee you that we are looking at and analyzing every option that we know of. Now, regarding the second part of your question, if there is an increase in funds allocated to transportation and bus drivers in the new budget. On Tuesday, we also received approval from our Board of Trustees to look into compensation of our driver positions, along with several other critical areas: custodians, food service workers, and special education aides and assistants. Our Chief Human Resources Officer is leading the negotiations with our employee associations in this regard, and we definitely are planning to have any compensation changes being part of the 22-23 school year budget.
Great. Thank you very much, Pete. I think that was thorough. We'll move on to our next question. How are you planning to support an increase in funding for the Debbie Smith Career and Technical Education Academy? Dr. McNeil, would you like to tackle this first?
Absolutely. Thank you so much,
Thank
Colleen, and obviously another very good question. So our allocations actually follow our students. So as we open up, which is fantastic that we have the new Debbie Smith Career and Technical Academy, which will open up in the fall of 2024. So what we would be doing is, as our students would be coming out from other high schools, those allocations will be adjusted, and then we will staff appropriately the new Career and Technical Academy over at Debbie Smith. But our allocations follow our student enrollment. So as our students are going to be enrolling in that new high school, the enrollments are probably going to be declining at our other comprehensive high schools. But the other aspect that I wanted to bring into this is, because this is such a unique high school, we have one other, AECT, we're also looking at having students come in from other districts and possibly even out of state when we're talking about career development. So that would be an increase in enrollment, which is a good thing for our school district as well, too.
Interesting. Thank you. This next question, it seems like it comes up every single budget form every single year, and so I'm going to direct this one to our Mark, who can always answer this question. But if you can give us an explanation of where is the money from the marijuana tax that the voters passed a number of years ago to provide more money for our schools, and why isn't anyone doing anything about it not being used as promised to the voters? So if you could elaborate on that a little, I think we'd all appreciate that.
It does. Thank you. Yes, it does come up every year. And I think people are remembering when the state was at least using the part or the majority of that tax money for its general fund. The legislature took a lot of heat for that. So democracy works, because They changed that. I believe it was the 2019 session. And now I am happy to report that virtually all marijuana tax revenues do go to school funding. There was a time when that was used to reduce the amount of state general fund support for K through 12, but again, the legislature stopped that, and with the new pupil-centered funding plan, any increases to that tax revenue should stay in the state education fund and should not go to reduce the state's general fund commitment. So it should be truly additive to the, to make the pie bigger. So just again to confirm, virtually all marijuana tax revenue does go to education in Nevada now.
Thank you for providing that to us. I believe this next question would also be right up your alley, and it's one that's probably very near and dear to the hearts of all staff members. But are COLA and step increases included in the budget for next year?
Again, I'm happy to report, yes, they are. We do account for that when we prepare the budget, and so the step increases for all of our employees are budgeted, and we have collective bargaining agreements with all but one employees association, and all of those cost of living adjustments are budgeted in this year's budget as well.
Good news indeed. Thank you. This one probably has a little bit of meat to it too that we'd like a little clarification on. How do the declining enrollment numbers impact funding for our district moving forward? I believe there may be a couple people that would like to weigh in on this question. Would you like to start, Dr. McNeil?
Sure, I'll go ahead and start, and then I'll look to my partner to my left over there. So obviously declining enrollment numbers does absolutely have a huge impact on our school district. And, we often talk about within our school district, our WCSD family, and we all have a part to play in this. I've often said that we have 8,000 ambassadors to talk about our school district and all of the options that we have. I am very, very proud of what we've been able to do within our school district, and we have many options available. We just talked about the CTE Academy. We have signature academies. We have workforce development. We have GT programming. We have AP classes. We have IB programming. We have athletics within our schools, which is all about engagement and keeping our kids in school. And so when we go to a barbecue, when we talk in the grocery store, and it's all up to us to make sure that we are able to talk about all the wonderful things that are happening within our school district. Do we have challenges? Absolutely, we have challenges. But we need to be really clear that we have some really great programming in our elementary schools. We've got STEM, we've got STEAM with the A for arts. We've got a lot of programming around robotics, cybersecurity, all of these types of career and technical, which is going to help make sure that we have a ready workforce, and that whether I go into the military to serve my country, whether I go right into a career, whether I go into higher education, whether that's a 2-year or 4-year program, all of these options we have available right here in the Washoe County School District. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to our CFO.
That's a hard act to follow. No, all of that is very true. Really, the math is simple when we do have declining enrollment. Again, our funding is as simple as two numbers. It's the per pupil amount we receive, which is $7,318 in next year's budget, times the number of the average daily enrollment. So when there is declining enrollment, it does impact and reduce the bottom line. And along with that, there is, when it's a material amount of declining enrollment, that means fewer allocations and positions needed, but that's not enough to offset that revenue loss. So as Dr. McNeil more eloquently said, it's on all of us to talk, to be good ambassadors for the district, to share our programming to the community, and toot our own horn a little bit about what we have to offer in the future.
Thank you both very much. And I see we do still have a few questions coming in, and I'd like to encourage our audience to continue to send their questions in, please. This next question, and yes, I was paying attention to the presentation, has to do with revenues and expenses, so I believe our budget director will best be able to answer this one. What will happen during these high inflationary times if the goods and service costs increase more dramatically than they have been budgeted for?
Thank you for your question. So we do have a general fund contingency account of just over $4 million that we'll use to address any inflationary pressures that we haven't already built into the budget. We've had to do that in the current year's budget, so fiscal year 21-22, to address increased fuel costs in our transportation department. And we also have other one-time needs that we can fund out a contingency if those come up. So again, we have $4.1 million budgeted in the general fund for the fiscal year 22-23 budget to address anything we haven't caught in the FY23 budget so far. Thank you.
Great, thank you. The next question we have is similar. It talks about the expenses going up, but we know that inflation and the cost of housing has risen dramatically recently, and I think our market here is one of the nation leaders. What can be done to help our newest employees? This is coming from a new teacher who's asking about it, and I received another one from other staff members, and it said, you know, for the lowest paid employees, how can they deal with this? So I don't know. Mark, would you like to tackle this?
I'll start, and then maybe Dr. McNeil might want to join in. We know this is a huge critical area. With rising inflation, it's now over 8%, I think, based on the last report from the federal government. You know, our salaries have not kept up with that. We're very open and honest about that. Again, on Tuesday, we developed or presented a plan to try to address those compensation issues. And again, this has to be negotiated with our employees associations, but we recognize that we're falling short of being able to cover those inflationary costs for everyone, but certainly in our most critical areas, there's a crying need to address it. And we talked about raising compensation for those most critical areas, in addition to a number of other options. So this is something we know we have to work on. But again, we can only spend what we receive. And so on a long-term basis, I mean, I think we were very clear on Tuesday with our board that the state has to come through. We desperately need more funding to catch up to that wage gap that we're seeing. And we get there's a lag in the state's budgeting process, and there's there needs to be a catch-up. But truly, we need greater funding to address those needs for our employees, because again, we can't dip into our cash to pay it because we use our cash and then it's gone. So if we did that, we might be able to help people out for a year, and then there's nothing left in the pot to cover unexpected, situations, again, like the pandemic that Jeff pointed out. So it's a very challenging issue, but at the end of the day, it relates to the level of funding we receive from the state, and we will need to lobby hard come 23 for greater funding and push greater than we ever have before, I think.
Well, thank you, Mark. And I'll just quickly add, so when we go back on those slides in our memory, and we were talking about the per pupil centered funding formula, one of the things that we continue to work on, Mark, myself, and Lindsay Anderson, our government affairs director, is around this CWI and the wage index. This is a big deal, and we need to get this rectified. And so we will continue to push hard. I will continue to be pushing hard to the very last day of my term here as the superintendent. We've got some meetings coming up. This will be on the commission, which Mark is a member of the Per Pupil Centered Funding Formula Commission. But this is a big deal when we talk about what is fair and adequate for funding with our school districts. So we are not going to be giving up the fight, but I will also say there was always an opportunity for our 8,000 employees to be engaged with this effort, as well as our board. And I was very clear in the State of Education address that we all have our own unique roles to play when we talk about funding and adequate funding. Mark sits on this commission and they dig into the numbers, and there's a conversation around adequate as well as optimum funding. We can't even get to the adequate funding at this point in time. And so we need to hit the adequate number before we even start talking seriously about optimum funding for our state. And this is a state issue, but it is increasingly important for the Washoe County School District around this effort.
Well, thank you, and obviously thank you both for the hard work on that, and that continues. This is an important issue because we have another question. It's kind of one of the high-level ones, but it talks about our economy being very robust right now, lots going on, and that means obviously that more taxes are being collected in our state. So how is that, or is that not helping the district? And I think, Mark, if you could maybe explain how that's working and maybe that lag time and some of that would come out.
Yeah, it's a really good question because we have seen, surprisingly, tax revenues across the state rebound dramatically. Statewide sales tax revenues are up more than 15%, and that's even a conservative projection or estimate. So this is kind of points out the difference between cities and counties and school districts, right? Cities and counties are seeing that those tax revenues come in immediately to their coffers, and that allows them to increase their budget and provide compensation increases for their employees. But we're locked in because the state has a 2-year budget to a meager 1.3% increase of our revenue in fiscal year 23. So what's happening is, again, school district revenues are pooled at the state, and those revenues are coming in to the state education fund, but we're not able to access them yet. And we know there's a critical need. So again, we'll push to try to use that funding as quickly as we can, but certainly we would expect to see that funding, being recognized for the next biennium, the next 2-year budget that the state will consider in early 2023. That's too late to help us in the fiscal year 23 budget, we understand, but it better appear in that budget for K through 12 education, in 2023. So that's again the difference between kind of how other entities prepare their budgets and receive tax revenues versus a school district.
Thank you, Mark. That was actually a really good question and a really good answer, so thank you. We have a question that's asking about the vacancy savings and where does that money go when there's still vacancies? Would that be you, Jeff, or Mark, or both?
I'll take a first shot at
it,
and then Jeff can provide more detail. But we do know we have vacancies. It's been hard to fill positions. Part of it is based on the wages we can offer at the current time. Part of it's just based on the labor market in Northern Nevada, and you just drive around and see, every fast food place is looking for workers as well as businesses across the region. So it's a huge regional issue as well. But to get to the question, we do have vacancies, and we do have, as a result, salary savings. Now, we already account for a certain level of salary savings in our budget. We know we can't fill and have filled every position every day of the year. So our budget already accounts for a certain level of salary savings, $6 million. We have seen slightly higher savings in the recent past. I'm sure we'll see it this fiscal year. Those savings go into our cash reserves and are able to be used for either one-time purposes like the COVID differential for teachers that are being paid, or other bonus payments that we're making to other employee units. And again, it's your savings account. It's there to account for when there are dips in revenues that might result from, say, a future recession. We no longer have a guarantee on our per pupil revenues, so we will need to cover any shortfalls in revenues that might happen in the future if revenues ever dip. So that's trying to be the short answer to that very good question.
Mark, that was a wonderful question. I don't have anything to add to it. Or answer, sorry.
Great. Thank you, gentlemen. One of our questions that came in is asking us about our enrollment being flat and asking what, obviously we know it has an impact, but I want to know why it's happening, especially when our region seems to be growing. Mark, thank you.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at this as well, and anybody else can join in. A lot of this is based on demographic factors, demographic changes. Birth rates of developed countries across the globe and in the U.S. are falling. People have less children. And so it's kind of a conundrum to watch. There are more people moving into Washoe County, but whether they're Californians who have fewer children, or their children have already gone to a high school and elementary school in California, have graduated, whether it's those folks, whether it's younger workers who work at Tesla who don't have children, whatever, people just are having fewer children. There's lots of other reasons for the flatness of enrollment, but I think we'll continue to see total population for Washoe County increase, while K through 12 age children being flat or decreasing. I was on a conference call with California school districts, and their state demographer is projecting, just to compare, a 9% enrollment decline across the state over the next decade in terms of K through 12 enrollment. So it's not just our region, it's just happening across the nation as, again, fewer children, are happening. I'll just say it that way.
Are happening. That's
Yeah.
an interesting way to word it. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that. So at this stage, we have covered most of the topics. As was mentioned earlier by Clerk Minetto, we did group some of our questions together to try and cover those topics, and we saw some trends in there with some of the issues that are really important. So we thank everyone who's participated, and I think I'd like to turn it over to our Vice President, Dr. Nicolette now. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for the robust information. So once again, my name is Dr. Diane Nicolette, and I serve as your Vice President of the Washoe County School District Board of Trustees. On behalf of my fellow trustees and the Washoe County School District staff, I want to thank you for participating in our virtual budget forum this evening. The budget is, of course, of utmost importance to us, and your thoughts, your feedback, and input is critically important. As trustees, we have the responsibility of oversight of the district's budget, and we recognize the importance of this stewardship and responsibility. On behalf of all of us, I appreciate those of you who have taken the time to join us and made this a priority. Our sincere thanks for joining us this evening. Good night and stay well. Thank you.